I was thinking back when I was working on this thing to just a few days after we shipped this game. You know, I'm feeling pretty fucking good about myself. You know, I'm doing okay here. Things are working out. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go home tonight. I'm gonna, get in my car, go to EB, and there's a Rome Total War expansion pack that I'm gonna pick up. I'm gonna go home, and I'm gonna play that tonight. A little treat for myself, a little reward. So I buy this thing, and it's, the Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion expansion pack. And I'm in my car, I'm at a red light. And I'm checking out the back and the new features and everything like that. And there is a sound behind me. These guys are honking behind me. So I turn around and I see these two dudes in a pickup truck. And they're like saying, roll down the window, roll down your window. And I'm like, okay. And I roll down the window. And they say to me, hey loser, what are you looking at, gay porn? And I realized that they got this Fabio-looking guy on the cover, and so I'm about to tell them what I think of them, and tell them my impression of them, but instead, half of my body comes to this nerdy voice to say, no, it's not gay porn. Actually, it's the latest expansion pack to Rome Total War, and it's a really fascinating simulation. And these guys are already, they're laughing at me and they're pulling away, and it's over, and I'm still trying to pull myself out of this situation, and all of a sudden, I go from being this 40-year-old guy coming off this big thing to exactly the same feeling I had when I was 12 years old, and I was this dorky little kid in the 7th grade. So, let's talk about being in the 7th grade. Now, when my parents rolled up my character, they didn't get any 18s. Couple of 12s, maybe 2 or 3 5s, strength, agility, charisma, Now, I was the only Jewish kid in my homeroom, and back then, I had a world-class speech impediment, which was, so this, you can imagine, I was very popular. I was a late bloomer on the social side of things, but when it came to zits, I was right on time. Every morning when I got on the bus, a kid named Kevin Petrosini used to punch me in the arm just because he fucking could. Now the kids around me, they were a little different. It's 1977. They were into Three's Company, football, hockey, Rush, Molly Hatchet. Some of them had already started to sneak in the woods to light up a Marlboro, or the really cool ones, they had already gotten to second base. Where had I gotten at this point? Yeah. That's right. When my little playmates and classmates are learning how to play drums like Neil Peart and blow smoke rings and unhook bras, I'm coming to the conclusion that swinging around Manhattan in a red and blue fucking spider costume would be awesome. So for the other kids, rock and roll served as this rite of passage, a way to navigate the space between childhood and adulthood from a safe distance. They came of age listening to Lennon and McCartney and Page and Plant, and I was reading Claremont and Byrne. Now comics, they were my geeky gateway drug. Of course I love the superpowers and the monsters and all that great stuff, but more than anything, I love the way comics let me dip my toe into the adult world from a safe distance as a kid. Peter Parker had to deal with earning a living. Tony Stark, had to deal with the demon in the bottle while beating the shit out of the Crimson Dynamo. The X-Men directly took on the issue of racism. Now, I secretly felt, to be honest, a step ahead of the other kids, more sophisticated. But of course, when you're a 12-year-old boy, there's one aspect of the adult world which you hear coming down the tracks much louder than others. So, This may date me, but in 1977, this was the fucking shit, okay? Now, Farrah Fawcett, Cheryl Tiegs, Bo Derek, this is what stirred the loins of my classmates. But again, you know, even though I wasn't very popular, I made it okay with myself because I viewed myself as a little more sophisticated, more refined, if you will. The woman I was into was continental and exotic. I wasn't sure she felt the same way about me because women, especially those from a foreign land, can be notoriously difficult to read. In short, I wanted to fuck the Scarlet Witch. Seriously, look at her. Now, besides the obvious problems this presented, you know, I was 12, I guess she was 25 or so. I was Jewish, she was the mutant daughter of Magneto, master of magnetism. Scarlet Witch was married to this dude. Okay? This is the vision, the rooster in my henhouse. An android with the personality of Mr. Spock and the reproductive organs of a Mr. Coffee. Now, I think it's safe to say I was a little behind in the emotional development department. This is also at the time that I got obsessed with a movie called Logan's Run. I was a little scared. People were like, Logan's Run, what the fuck's he talking about? This was a big deal for me. I used to have dreams that I'd be with my mom, who's actually right there, and I looked at her palm flower and it was like blinking red and black. I'm like, Mom, no! You were about 30 back then, right? This also, so, you know, one day I showed up at the comic book store after seeing the movie, and this is what I saw. And, you know, bam, this was so much better than a movie. Because back in 1977, when there was, you know, there's no VHS or DVD to watch stuff on, a comic book was a way you could take something you love and just examine it frame by frame. And that's what I did. And better yet, this was drawn by George Perez, the guy who drew the fucking Scarlet Witch in the Avengers. But now, he was drawing a real girl that I had seen really naked in a real movie. So, I viewed this as, it's an important moment in my sexual development. But there's a problem. After the 7th issue of Logan's Run, I went back to the candy store to look for the 8th, and I'm spinning that rack around. It's not there. Go back the next week. Go back the next week. Go back the next week. It doesn't show up. And what happened? I don't know. I was completely in the dark. You know, this is 1977. There was no independent source of nerd information back then. As you know, as a species, nerds crave information. We're information stalkers. We sit outside information's house with binoculars and leave creepy messages on its answering machine. But back then, there was no fucking information. There was no Wired magazine. There was no podcast. There was no Any Cool News. Nobody ever said or posted in their blog, hey dude, Logan's Run got canceled. You know, I still don't know for sure, but 31 years later, I'm sort of starting to give up hope. The truth is, I was ashamed of my passion for these things, for comic books. You know, maybe because I was a bad friend to comics, they were a bad friend to me, because I wasn't so nerdy that I didn't know they wouldn't exactly help me influence people and make friends. When kids found out I was secretly reading comics during my lunch hour, hidden in my notebook, they let me have it. Spider-Man? Levine's reading fucking Spider-Man, what a loser, what are you, 5 years old? Levine, hey everybody, Levine's reading Spider-Man. And I remember thinking, actually, it's not actually Spider-Man, it's Marvel Team Up. He just featured in this issue. Which I didn't say, which is probably for the best. You know, looking back on it, it's probably, I can understand, you know, some of their feelings about me. It was a very different time. It just, nerd culture just wasn't as present in the world. But as I said, comics were the only, the gateway drug for me. On Hanukkah in 1978, my parents dropped the real bomb on me. Now, holy fucking shit, right? For the next 2 years, I would spend every weekend blowing up asteroids, jumping over pitfalls, and killing these guys. But then I found something else, something different, something which changed my life. I first came across it in the dingy back corner of a college bookstore. I bought it, put it in a plain brown wrapper, brought it home. And that night when I unwrapped it in the privacy of my bedroom, I got a taste of something that most of us know as a joyful experience shared with a loved one. But that night I did it shamefully, in secret, and alone. But I've wised up. This stuff never left my room now. I was a stealth nerd, closet dork. I didn't want to like the shit I liked. I wanted to be somebody else. I wanted to smoke cigarettes and listen to Deep Purple like the kid across the street. I wanted to be good at sports like my brother. I didn't want to go to bed at night thinking about the Vault of the Drow and air-sea battle on Battlestar Galactica, but I did. I tried changing, I tried fitting in. I even managed to hang out with some of the kids on the fringes of normal, kids with problems, the kids who hung out at the bowling alley and ate junk food and shoplifted candy and soda from the gas station. But it didn't last. There was something that set me apart from these kids, something irreconcilable. So by the time I entered high school, I gave up. I accepted my life sentence in Nerd Siberia, condemned by the very things I loved the most. Now, had quite a dating life. Now, any of you who've ever ridden a school bus to a public school will know about the hierarchy inherent in the seating order. In the back seats of the stoners, far away from the driver, where they can blast Sugar Magnolia, make out with their girlfriends, and smoke the occasional roach. The cooler kids and the jocks sort of sat in the middle, where they could, take a good look at the freak show in the back and make fun of the nerds in the front. And as I said, the nerds were in the front row, close to the driver, who was their only lifeline, and once the wedgies started flying. Now, sitting in the second row, I looked down at the nerds in the first. Dorks, I thought. It was my pathetic way of staying out of the bottom of that particular barrel. Now, this one day on the bus, I'm minding my own business, trying not to get noticed or picked on. And I start hearing these strange sounds coming from the two kids in the front row. I couldn't hear everything, but after a few seconds of focusing my attention, I could begin to make out a few of the phrases. Owl bear. Succubus. Saving throw. Neo-Otyug. Now these kids were talking about D&D, and they weren't just talking about D&D, they were talking about advanced D&D. I started to panic. I was casting terrified glances around me. I felt like I was in the middle of Nazi-occupied Paris, and some idiot started belting out like Marseillaise. I had to shout out, "Shut up, you fools, or they'll hear you!" But nothing happened. These kids continued to talk about the intricacies of double classing, the finer points of saving throws, and the Tao of the Dungeon Master's Guide without betraying even the slightest hint of fear. It took me nearly 20 minutes to work up my courage to talk to them. So, what campaign are you guys doing? I asked with the insouciance of the Duke of York inquiring about the spring season at Ascot. For a moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake, that I had stumbled into some Gygaxian gingerbread house. Lured to my doom by jocks in nerds' clothing. But this wasn't a trap. The kids were named Bill and Doug, By the time I got off the bus, I had wrangled an invitation to the D&D game at Bill's house on the 31st. I was so caught up in talking to these guys that I forgot my stop completely and had to get off the bus 3 miles after it. Walked all the way home. Even as Bill's mother led me down the hall to the living room, I was still in a defensive posture, ready for the other shoe to drop. Best case scenario, I was hoping for 2 or 3 nerds sequestered in a dusty attic, huddled around a moldy set of 20-sided dice. Nothing I saw could prepare me for what I saw next. There were 9 or 10 kids around a long dining table, laughing, drinking soda, eating Doritos, just having a grand old fucking time. Before I could react, Darth Vader, who I just noticed sitting at the end of the table, stood up, walked over to me, and held his hand in the air. I stared at Darth Vader, not sure what to do next. But when the Dark Lord of the Sith offers you 5, you give him 5. And Vader handed me 5 right back. And then the helmet went off, and it was Bill, the kid from the bus. Before I fully remembered it was Halloween, Bill was leading me back to the snack table. Hey Ken, glad you could make it. Grab something to eat and sit next to the Dungeon Master. The module that night was The Mansion of Mad Professor Ludlow, right out of the latest issue of the Dragon magazine. If you laugh, everybody's gonna know how fucking old you are, so don't laugh. The DM handed me a character sheet and told me that the party could use a fighter or a paladin, but no pressure. I asked this kid, who happens to be sitting right over there, what his name was. Drew, he said. 3 months later, I'd be spending most weekends at his house playing Star Raiders on his Atari 800, listening to Monty Python albums and getting up early on Sunday to watch Doctor Who and The Prisoner. Drew had cable TV, a subscription to Starlog and Fangoria, and a table dedicated exclusively to the painting of Ralph the Dungeons & Dragons miniatures. At first, the video games and the sci-fi movies and the role-playing were the reason our D&D group got together. After a year or so, they became the excuse. It took me around 14 years of searching, but I'd finally found my tribe. But then it was 1982, and then it was 1983, and then things started to change. We'd still play D&D, but there were strange new additions. I'd look around the game table and see all the familiar faces, Drew, Bill, Doug, John, and Rob. But now there were new faces. Female faces. Let me let you in on a little secret. When certain members of your D&D group start inappropriately buffing other members of your D&D group, when certain members of your D&D group start handing over primo loot drops to other members of your D&D group who don't necessarily deserve those loot drops, and the beneficiaries of this generosity happen to have names like Heather, Kelly, and Pam, the days of your D&D group are fucking numbered. After a short while, even as the core activities of our tribe came under the assault of the fairer sex, the core activities of our tribe came under assault by the fairer sex. Well, one Saturday would guarantee an expedition to the barrier peaks or a return to the planet of the apes, I might wake up to find that something else was now planned. Ice skating at Heather's grandmother's pond, perhaps. Or Christmas carols and hot cocoa in front of a roaring fire at Callie's house. And before long, the group began to splinter into atomic pairs of lovebirds. And then things really began to fall apart. Oh, Doug and Kelly can't make it, they're going to the movies. John and Pam are headed to the mall. Bill and Heather are going on a picnic. Lacking a girlfriend of my own, my feelings of surprise and confusion more slowly into betrayal. The truth is, my tribal brothers were simply ahead of me in the game. Feeling the wind of impending adulthood, beating against their faces. They were just waking up and smelling what was coming in the future. College was the warning shot that alerted them to the things that lay down the road: jobs, families, health insurance, 401k plans. And back in 1983, when one tried to put the Player's Handbook, Castle Wolfenstein, and the Wrath of Khan into a spreadsheet called adulthood, Lotus 123 returned to fucking syntax error. As the tribal activities began to peter out, I was forced to reevaluate. So where the hell was somebody who spent the last 3 years playing D&D every weekend going to go where he might feel comfortable? What social group would possibly accept someone with limited social skills and extensive improvisation gleaned from the late night parlays in the Temple of Elemental Evil? Only one place. Yes, Drama Club. Grease Lightning, Bad Shakespeare, and Jazz Hands. After a brief and unfortunate flirtation on stage, I realized that my skills are better suited for something behind the scenes. As fate would have it, I had some success in some young playwrights contests. And with that validation, I pronounced myself a full-blown writer. I enrolled in a college with a decent theater program and completed the transition from role-playing nerd to drama geek. By the end of freshman year, I was rolling joints instead of D20s and initiating encounters with the opposite sex that did not require a check against diplomacy. My life was beginning to change. And when I graduated college, things really started to take off. I moved to LA, hooked up with a Hollywood agent, and snagged a reasonably hot girlfriend. I was even sharing an apartment with Marissa Tomei's brother, one of the Goonies, and the guy who starred in Leprechaun 2. And that dude totally fucking carried that movie, I'm sorry. Now, I've been pitching around a script, an ultra-violent vampire movie, and the general response I got from the studio execs was, vampires? What are you, 11? No adult wants to see a movie about vampires. But the movie executives still, for some reason, seemed to like the cut of my jib. So before long, Paramount had this idea for this movie, a romantic comedy, and they called to tell my agent they wanted me to write it. Now, how they decide upon me? Now, I was not in the room, so I wasn't there, I was not a fly on the wall, but I imagined the conversation went something like this. So what's on the agenda today, boys? Well, we need to get a movie written. Well, what kind of movie? It's a frothy romantic comedy, perfect for the soccer moms and the matinee crowd. Amazing, so who are we gonna hire to write it? Well, how about Levine? Levine? Who's Levine? Oh, you know, he's that dweeby kid who wrote that piece of shit vampire movie we hated. Fantastic, somebody get my checkbook. I think we got ourselves a blockbuster, and that was it, I was hired. I was no longer Ken Levine, pathetic nerd. I was Ken Levine, Hollywood fucking screenwriter. I was so about breakfast with my agent, fancy lunches at the studio, and fancier dinners with my manager. You know, I soon started to feel like I was fitting in with the Hollywood scene. Nobody there was remotely like my nerdy friends. These weren't gamers, you know, these weren't comic book geeks. These were people who thought Doctor Who was their kid's ophthalmologist. And that fantasy role-playing was something that happened between a man and a very expensive prostitute. And truth be told, I was never comfortable in this scene, but I felt like I should be, right? I thought, this is my place. Why can't I be the cool guy? Why can't I be the winner? You know, fuck vampires, fuck Dungeons and Dragons, fuck Wing Commander and Spider-Man and all that shit. No, I want to read Architectural Digest, and I want to watch foreign films that don't have people like this in it, okay? Why do I have to be the nerd forever? And so I threw myself into the romantic comedy with gusto. This was my chance to prove myself, to show my true colors. I could do more than vampires. I could breathe life into our plucky heroine and tug at the heartstrings of the soccer moms. This movie was going to prove once and for all that I was not who all those guys in 7th grade thought I was. And then, in what should have been a surprise to absolutely no one, my romantic comedy turned out to completely suck. And And before I knew it, my friends at the studio started acting about 100% less friendly. And approximately 10 seconds later, I was out of a job. Shortly afterwards, I called my agent and found out she had taken a position at Warner Brothers and not bothered to tell me. Hearing the news, I pleaded with her former assistant. "But she's my agent." He was quiet for a moment and then said, with a small trace of pity, "Not anymore." And with that, I went from Ken Levine, the screenwriter, to Ken Levine, the guy who used to be a screenwriter. The truth is, not much happened to me over the next 7 years. I drifted through a bunch of random jobs which had neither passion nor particular talent. But as my life was losing focus, games were gaining momentum. Metroid, Zelda, Herzog's Y, XCOM, Civilization, bring it. Star Control, Warcraft, Ultima Underworld. I got lured back in to gaming, and I got lured back in hard. Now, I was miserable during the day, but the moment I got home and turned on my SNES or turned on my PC, it all sort of went away. I was numbing myself, I knew this. I was no different than my neighbor who would go every night to the neighborhood pub or maybe pop off to Vegas for the weekend when he could afford it. If I had my DS then, I would have brought it with me to work and snuck off quietly to nip into it during the day like a lush with a flask. And then one day, I had a revelation. I bought a lot of video games. Wouldn't it stand to reason that if I was buying all these games that somebody was getting paid to make those games? I ran down to the newsstand and picked up a copy of Next Gen magazine. I was right. In the back, there were ads for actual jobs making video games. I didn't even understand about what half of them were. QA manager, lead systems programmer. But then one caught my eye. Video game designer, Looking Glass Studios. Now, it never even occurred to me that somebody designed these games. I figured they just grew naturally and perhaps in a petri dish. But I applied for a job at Looking Glass, the guys that made Ultima Underworld and System Shock, and a month later, I got a call from the recruiter, and a week after that, I was on a flight to Boston. And the moment I walked in the door, I was just struck by this incredible sense of deja vu. My experience with working and with offices had come from consulting at American Express and Citibank. I expected rows of cubicles and miserable salary men waiting for 5 o'clock to come. Maybe it'd be a little better than that, but still, it was a job, right? Maybe through the fog of time, I've romanticized it a bit. But if what I remember isn't literally true, it was then and it still is true in spirit. I saw guys shouting at each other in a friendly match of Soul Calibur. I saw one dude screaming at mock rage in his buddy as his friend flipped a surprise card, mana burning him to death. I saw 2 young women head into a conference room with a bowl of popcorn and the director's cut of Blade Runner on VHS. I saw game designers building levels for Terra Nova with the same geek intensity that I used to put into my own dungeons that I mapped out on pen and paper. I saw dozens of happy nerds at peace with themselves and each other, knowing that they had found a place where the things that once rendered them different and strange now made them completely and forever at home. Somehow and unexpectedly, I had once again found my tribe. And now it's 13 years later, and everything I owe to finding this tribe, my career, my home, my friends, my colleagues, even my wife. And after so many years of running from the very things I loved, it's amazing to come here, a guy like me, and see what Gabe and Tycho and all the staffers and volunteers have built in this place, how they have managed to bring so many of us together. We're united by a common element, but it is not the color of our skin that brings us together. It is not the shared political ideology, and it is not the country of our birth. No, what brings us all together to PAX is we're a giant bunch of fucking nerds. But even as we're united, it's even more amazing for me to see how diverse nerddom has become. Now, he's here for the nerd core. That girl, she's here to pawn noobs in the Smash Brothers tournament. That guy, he's all about the female gamer empowerment panel. He's here to check out the guild. And that guy, he's stalking Will Wheaton. Now, what does an older dude like me have to say about all these strange and varied interests, most of which didn't even exist when I grew up, when I came up as a nerd? Bring that shit on. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for coming. And thank you for letting me be part of your tribe. Now go and enjoy the fuck out of PAX. Thank you.